Language as psychological fingerprint, the diagnostic dimension of psycholinguistics. Language is far more than a mere tool for information transmission. Every linguistic utterance we produce is the result of complex cognitive, emotional, and social processes. It functions as an involuntary self-revelation. In psycholinguistics, we understand language as a cognitive fingerprint. It provides deep insights into a person's personality architecture, emotional states, and cognitive structures. This fundamental insight is based on a key assumption. Every linguistic utterance is the product of various mental processes. Our attentional focus determines what we perceive in the first place. Our memory processes influence what and how we remember. Our emotional states color what we feel and express. Our cognitive schemas structure how we organize the world. And finally, our self-concept defines who we are in relation to the world. These processes leave linguistic traces. These traces often lie below conscious control and are precisely therefore so revealing. The groundbreaking research of James Pennebaker has brought a central insight to light. His LIWC system, the linguistic inquiry and word count, revealed something surprising. It is not the large, content-heavy words that reveal the most about a person. Rather, it is precisely the small, seemingly insignificant function words. Pronouns, articles, prepositions, and conjunctions tell us the most. These linguistic elements largely evade conscious control. Therefore, they reveal particularly authentically the psychological condition of the speaker. Pronouns, for example, are remarkably revealing indicators of self-concept. A high frequency of I formulations like I, me, or my correlates with various psychological states and characteristics. People with depression typically show massively increased I focus. This reflects the self-reference and rumination characteristic of depression. Interestingly, people with lower social status also use I pronouns more frequently. High-status individuals, in contrast, tend to direct their attention outward to the environment. Paradoxically, high I frequency is also an indicator of honesty. Liars tend to avoid the pronoun I to diffuse responsibility for their statements. Gender-specific differences also appear here statistically. Women use I formulations more frequently than men. In contrast, a we focus typically signals social integration and belonging. In relationships, the use of we correlates with higher relationship satisfaction. It indicates that partners conceive of themselves as a unit. However, differentiation is necessary here. Authoritarian leaders often use we manipulatively. They suggest a sense of community that does not actually exist. One distinguishes here between inclusive and exclusive we. The latter draws boundaries between one's own group and others. A focus on you can signal both empathy as well as blame assignment and distancing. The formulation you should has a completely different psychological quality than one could or I would. The former appears more directive and potentially more confrontational. When people predominantly speak in third person or avoid pronouns altogether, this indicates an academically distanced style. It can signal either emotional avoidance or high cognitive complexity. The syntactic structure of our language also reveals deep insights into our cognitive architecture. A hypertactic style is characterized by complex subordinate clause constructions. Consider this sentence. Although I understand that the situation is difficult, I believe that if we consider the various perspectives, we can arrive at a solution that satisfies all parties involved. This is an indicator of high working memory capacity. It often also indicates high educational level. People with pronounced need for cognition tend towards such nested structures. They find pleasure in complex thinking. However, a hypertactic style with many qualifications can also conceal uncertainty. The many subordinate clauses and restrictions relativize the main statement. A paratactic style, on the other hand, strings together simple main clauses. The situation is difficult. Various perspectives exist. We can find a solution. Everyone can be satisfied. This can have various meanings, It can express clarity and directness, as often found in leadership styles, but it can also indicate low cognitive resources. This happens in stress, fatigue, or cognitive impairment. Strong emotional arousal typically reduces syntactic complexity. Cognitive resources are bound by the emotion. Not to be forgotten is also that a paratactic style can be a conscious, cultural, or stylistic choice, as with Ernest Hemingway. The level of abstraction at which we communicate is another revealing marker. The linguistic category model by Semin and Fiedler distinguishes various levels here, from concrete action verbs like he slams the door, through interpretive action verbs like he is angry, and state verbs like he hates noise, to adjectives like he is aggressive. The choice of abstraction level is by no means random. It follows psychological patterns. People tend to describe negative behavior of outgroups at higher abstraction levels. They thereby characterize it as a stable trait. Positive behavior of the in-group is also described abstractly. One's own misconduct, however, is formulated concretely and situationally. This frames it as an exception. Higher education and a desire for stability and predictability also lead to higher abstraction. Research on personality diagnostics via language has demonstrated robust correlations. These exist between linguistic features and the Big Five personality dimensions. Extroverted people use more social words like friends, people, or party. They express more positive affect. They use exclamation marks and emoticons more frequently. Their formulations tend to be shorter and more spontaneous. They use more we and less I. This reflects their social orientation. People with high neuroticism show a completely different language pattern. They frequently use words of negative emotion. Words like anxious, sad, or worried appear often. They show pronounced self-focus with high I frequency. Negations like not, never, or no are also characteristic. So are tentative formulations with maybe or possibly. Interestingly, anxious people also use fewer articles. This indicates a fragmented speech flow under increased tension. Conscientiousness manifests in correct grammar and orthography. Conscientious people use longer words that often correlate with higher education. They use achievement words like goal, success, or work. They pay attention to precision in article use. They avoid filler words. This reflects their orientation towards standards and accuracy. Agreeable people express more positive emotions. They use more social words and fewer negations. They use we more frequently. They avoid you in accusatory contexts. This shows their conflict-avoidant orientation. Also characteristic are hedges like kind of or a bit. These soften statements and leave room for other perspectives. Openness to experience shows itself in larger vocabulary. More abstract concepts appear. There are richer sensory descriptions and higher question frequency. Syntax can be more experimental. This reflects the willingness to explore also in linguistic form. Psycholinguistic analyses become particularly clinically relevant with psychopathological language patterns. Depression manifests linguistically through massively increased I frequency. This reflects the pathological self-focus and rumination. Negative affect dominates. Words like sad, hopeless, or empty are frequent. Characteristic is the use of absolutist language. Words like always, never, completely, or nothing appear often. Depressed people orient themselves linguistically strongly toward the past. They show reduced syntactic complexity. Their cognitive resources are bound by depression. Reference to other people is reduced. This reflects social withdrawal. Increased mortality words like death, die, or end can occur. James Pennebaker was able to predict suicide risk from diary entries with frightening precision. He based this precisely on these linguistic markers. The opposite shows itself in mania or hypermania. Rapid topic changes reflect flight of ideas. Many exclamation marks and superlatives appear. Words like fantastic or incredible are used frequently. Grandiose language dominates. Coherence can be reduced. the sheer speed and quantity of produced language is increased. Schizophrenia, particularly formal thought disorders, shows itself in characteristic linguistic abnormalities. Tangentiality means that answers do not relate to asked questions. In looseness of associations, coherence between sentences is completely absent. Neologisms occur. These are word coinages. Clang associations also appear. Here, words are linked by sound rather than meaning. Concretism shows itself in the inability to abstract. Metaphors are understood literally. Pronoun errors are characteristic. These have unclear references like, he went to him and then she did that. Also characteristic is a combination. Reduced syntactic complexity appears with simultaneously increased semantic bizarreness. Narcissism paradoxically shows both high I frequency and high we frequency. This reflects the grandiose self that simultaneously sees itself as representative of a group. Status words are characteristic. Words like win, superior, or best appear frequently. So do self-referential superlatives. A lack of you perspective indicates missing theory of mind. Many positive self-descriptions dominate the language. However, covert narcissists show different patterns. They use more victim language. Psychopathy manifests in reduced emotional language. This reflects affective flatness. Instrumental language dominates. Words like use, get, or advantage are frequent. Characteristic is the use of past tense when describing one's own deeds. This signals psychological distancing. More filler words indicate the cognitive load of lying. A lack of causal conjunctions appears. Words like because or therefore are missing. This shows reduced capacity for self-reflection. Linguistic lie detection is a fascinating field of application. People are poor at consciously controlling lies, but language betrays them through various markers. Liars reduce their I use to distance themselves from their lie. They formulate, "it is the case that," instead of "I have." Negative emotions seep through. Words like unfortunately or regrettably appear. Language becomes simpler because lying is cognitively demanding. Fewer details appear. Sentences are shorter. More motion verbs focus on the action sequence rather than inner states. Distancing language is characteristic. This person appears instead of a name. The object replaces my bag. Particularly revealing is the absence of exclusive words. Words like but not, except, or without are missing. Liars avoid nuances because they are too complex to manage. Theory of mind, that is, the ability to empathize with others, also shows itself linguistically. The frequency of mental state verbs is revealing. Words like believes, hopes, or feels correlate with empathy and social intelligence, but also with manipulative ability. Epistemic modality regarding others is informative. Compare she might think that versus she thinks that. The former shows awareness of uncertainty about others' mental states. It demonstrates epistemic modesty. Temporal orientation in language is also revealing. A focus on the past is typical for depression, also for trauma as in PTSD, and for nostalgia. Statistically also for conservative political orientation. Present focus can signal mindfulness, but also substance use in impulsive individuals, and low future orientation. Future focus indicates optimism and planning ability, but can also be avoidance of the present in anxiety. Hedging and certainty markers are further important dimensions. Hedges like kind of, so to speak, sort of, a bit, or maybe, can fulfill various functions. They can express politeness and face-saving. They can show epistemic uncertainty and academic caution. They can reflect social anxiety or be the result of female socialization. Women statistically hedge more in mixed groups. Boosters, however, work differently. Words like absolutely, definitely, obviously, clearly, or undoubtedly can be overcompensation in uncertainty. They can express dominance seeking or reflect male socialization. People also show consistent metaphorical frameworks in their language. Combat metaphors indicate an agonal competitive worldview. Phrases like, I fight against, I won, or I was defeated reveal this. Journey metaphors show a process-oriented, development-focused perspective. Phrases like, I am on the way, I got lost, or I seek my path demonstrate this. Container metaphors can indicate control needs or fear of losing control. Phrases like, I feel trapped, I am full of emotions, or I need to get out suggest this. An often underestimated but highly informative dimension are disfluencies. These are moments in speech production that appear as disturbances or interruptions of the flow of speech. Pauses, filler words like or self-corrections, repetitions, and false starts are frequently interpreted in everyday life as signs of nervousness, or lack of preparation, or incompetence. This view, however, is fundamentally wrong. It misunderstands the complex cognitive reality hidden behind these phenomena. Disfluencies are by no means merely disturbances. They are windows into the real-time processes of speech production. They reveal the underlying cognitive processing. They show where and how the speaker thinks, plans, monitors, and possibly also deceives. Psycholinguistic research has shown that the type, frequency, and placement of disfluencies is highly systematic. It provides deep insights into personality, cognitive capacities, and momentary mental states. Cognitive planning manifests directly in disfluencies. Here, a counterintuitive finding emerges. Intelligent people, especially those with high verbal intelligence, actually produce more and during complex explanations. This contradicts naive intuition, but is cognitively completely plausible. When someone explains a complex concept, the brain must perform simultaneous cognitive operations. The concept itself must be activated and structured. The appropriate level of abstraction for the listener must be chosen. The syntactic structure must be planned, and the lexical units must be selected. This massive cognitive load leads to delays in articulation. These manifest as filler words. The is not a sign of incompetence. On the contrary, it is a signal of intense cognitive work. Studies show that the frequency of filled pauses correlates with the complexity of the thoughts to be formulated. Experts explaining their field produce more disfluencies than when they speak about simple everyday topics. The conceptual density is higher. Interestingly, filler words also serve a communicative function. They signal to the conversation partner, I'm not finished with my turn yet, don't interrupt me. In this sense, they are social coordination signals. They regulate conversational flow. Silent pauses, on the other hand, invite interruption. But an secures the speaker role. Culturally, there is considerable variation here. In some cultures, a longer pause before answering is valued as a sign of thoughtfulness and respect. In others, like many Western cultures, quick responses are expected. Self-monitoring and perfectionism show themselves particularly clearly in self-corrections. When someone says, I read the book, the article, this self-correction reveals several things. First, it shows that an internal monitoring system is active. It checks one's own speech production in real time. Second, the decision to correct shows that precision is important to the speaker. People with high perfectionism correct themselves more frequently, even for minimal inaccuracies that would not be relevant for communication. Third, the type of correction reveals cognitive processes. Was the wrong word activated from semantic proximity? Book and article are semantically related. Was there phonological interference? Was it a grammatical error? The frequency of self-corrections correlates with trait characteristics. Conscientiousness is one. Neuroticism is another. Conscientious people monitor their speech more strongly to meet standards. People with high neuroticism also monitor more intensely, but from fear of negative evaluation. The valence of the self-correction is different. Conscientious people do it confidently. That's article, of course. Anxious people correct uncertainly. Or was that an article? Yes, article. Deception leaves characteristic traces in disfluencies, though not in the way laypeople expect. The naive notion that liars stutter and hesitate more is too simple. In fact, the relationship between deception and disfluencies is complex and context-dependent. Liars who have prepared a story can speak surprisingly fluently, sometimes even too fluently. This itself can be a warning signal. The speech seems rehearsed, mechanical. Spontaneous lies, however, create cognitive load. The liar must simultaneously suppress the truth, construct the lie, monitor its consistency, and observe the counterpart's reaction. What betrays deception is not the mere frequency of disfluencies, but their placement. Disfluencies occur in deception at unexpected places. If someone is asked their name and hesitates, this is highly suspicious. My name is, John. One's own name should be immediately available. If, on the other hand, someone is asked about details of a complex event and answers fluently without ever hesitating, this can also be suspicious. Genuine memories require reconstruction work. The microstructure of pauses is revealing here. Liars often show increased response latency. They need time to construct the lie, but then relatively fluent production of the prepared lie itself. Working memory load is directly measurable through disfluencies. Working memory is a limited resource. It is essential for speech production. When it becomes overloaded, disfluencies break in. This can happen through the task itself, formulating very complex information, for example, through multitasking, speaking and doing something else simultaneously, through emotional stress. Anxiety binds working memory resources, or through cognitive impairment, fatigue, intoxication, neurological diseases. Experimentally, one can manipulate working memory load and observe the effects on disfluencies. When people must keep a number sequence in mind while speaking, the rate of disfluencies rises dramatically. With cognitive fatigue, after long concentration work, disfluencies also increase. The quality of self-corrections decreases. People no longer notice their errors as reliably. Clinically, disfluencies are highly relevant for diagnosing various disorders. In beginning dementia, disfluencies increase, especially word-finding difficulties. People struggle for words. The thing that you use to, for writing. In ADHD, disfluencies are elevated due to reduced executive control. In anxiety disorders, there are more filled pauses and repetitions. In aphasia after stroke, disfluencies are massively increased, often of characteristic quality. For example, phonemic paraphasias, where sounds are substituted. The development of disfluencies over the lifespan is also revealing. Children show high rates of disfluencies. These decrease with increasing language competence. In old age, they rise again, partly due to reduced cognitive resources, partly due to slowed lexical access. The type of disfluencies changes. Children show more repetitions and revisions. They are still learning to coordinate planning and articulation. Older adults show more word-finding difficulties. The prosody of disfluencies is also informative. The can be intoned in various ways. Falling intonation signals, longer pause. Rising signals, shorter pause. Lengthened signals, extreme cognitive search. The length of the lengthening correlates with the difficulty of the cognitive operation. A short about 200 milliseconds, indicates minor retrieval problems. A long over 1000 milliseconds indicates major search processes or planning of complex structures. Cross-linguistic variation is also fascinating. Different languages have different preferred filler words. Versus in English. In French. Ano in Japanese. The frequency of disfluencies varies between cultures, partly due to different speech tempo norms, partly due to different tolerance for silence. In forensic linguistics, authorship attribution finds practical application. It is actually possible to identify perpetrators from texts through analysis of idiolect, syntactic preferences, vocabulary, function word patterns, even error patterns. Famous cases demonstrate the power of these methods. The Unabomber Ted Kaczynski was partially identified through linguistic analysis of his manifesto. J.K. Rowling as Robert Galbraith was revealed as the author through algorithms. However, we must be aware of the limitations and ethical problems of these approaches. Correlations apply to groups, not necessarily to individuals. Language is highly contextual. Register shifting between formal and informal contexts can change all markers. Many patterns are culturally specific. They may only apply to weird populations. Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic populations. Those who know these patterns can consciously manipulate them. We must be careful of linguistic determinism and stigmatization. The logic of, "you speak depressively, therefore you are depressed," is dangerous. The transformation through computational psycholinguistics marks a fundamental paradigm shift. It changes how we can extract psychological states and personality traits from language. The convergence of machine learning, big data, and traditional psycholinguistics has opened possibilities that were unthinkable just a few decades ago. Machine learning models today operate on volumes of data that would be impossible for human analysts to process. In doing so, they can identify patterns that would escape even trained experts. The prediction of depression from social media data has now reached an accuracy of 70 to 80%. This, in many cases, reaches or even exceeds the diagnostic accuracy of human clinicians. These models analyze not just individual posts, but longitudinal patterns. Over weeks and months, they capture subtle shifts in language use, shifts that are often not conscious to the person affected. The gradual increase in negative affect words, the creeping elevation of eye focus, the decrease in social references, the shift from future to past orientation. Particularly remarkable is that these models can often identify warning signals weeks before clinical manifestation. Natural language processing algorithms extract hundreds of features simultaneously: lexical density, syntactic complexity, semantic coherence, temporal orientation, emotional valence and arousal, social connectivity in language, and many more. Personality estimation from texts has also made impressive progress. Correlations of approximately 0.4 to 0.5 exist between algorithmically estimated and test-measured personality. These may appear moderate at first glance, but they are to be evaluated as substantial in psychological research, especially considering that these estimates are obtained from completely natural texts. Texts not produced for diagnostic purposes. These models often use deep learning architectures, particularly transformer-based models that learn contextual embeddings of words and sentences. They thus capture not only which words are used, but also in what context, and in what relation to each other. An extroverted person might use the word alone, but typically in contexts like, "I don't like being alone." An introverted person would more likely formulate, "I enjoy being alone." These context-sensitive nuances are captured by modern NLP models. Author identification, also called stylometry, has experienced a revolution through machine learning. While early approaches were based on simple features like word frequencies, modern systems use high-dimensional representations. They simultaneously consider thousands of stylistic features. These range from character n-grams, letter sequences that capture individual typing habits, through syntactic parse trees, which map preferences in sentence structures, to semantic embeddings, which capture thematic preferences and conceptual association patterns. Support vector machines, random forests, and neural networks can use these features to identify authors, even when they consciously try to disguise their style. The accuracy is so high that courts worldwide are increasingly accepting linguistic evidence in proceedings. Automated lie detection is possibly one of the most fascinating applications. Humans are notoriously poor at detecting lies, with accuracies often barely above chance level. Algorithms, however, achieve accuracies of 60 to 70% or higher in controlled settings. They systematically analyze the cognitive and emotional traces that deception leaves in language. These systems attend not just to individual markers but to complex patterns. The combination of reduced eye use, increased motion verbs, simplified syntax, increased hesitation at unexpected places, increased emotional distancing, and missing exclusive details. Machine learning models can additionally learn how these markers must be weighted differently in various contexts. The linguistic indicators of deception differ between spontaneous speech, prepared statements, and written communication. The ethical implications of these technologies are enormous. They cannot be overstated. The possibility of diagnosing psychological states from social media raises fundamental questions about privacy, consent, and the limits of surveillance. If employers can algorithmically estimate the burnout risk of their employees from emails, if insurance companies can calculate depression risk from social media posts, new forms of discrimination and control emerge. The automation of personality assessment could lead to new forms of profiling. People are categorized and treated based on their language patterns. The precision of author identification threatens anonymous expression and whistleblowing. Algorithmic lie detection could be used for suppression in authoritarian regimes. At the same time, these technologies also offer enormous potential for good. Early detection of mental health problems could save lives, especially when connected with appropriate support. Forensic applications can help solve crimes and exonerate the innocent. The automation of psycholinguistic analysis democratizes access to insights that were previously reserved for experts with years of training. Large language models like GPT and their successors have inherently learned psycholinguistic patterns because they were trained on gigantic corpora of human language. These models reproduce not only the statistical regularities of language, but also the psychological patterns encoded in it. They have implicitly learned that depressive language has certain characteristics, that different personalities express themselves differently. That deception leaves linguistic traces. This makes them powerful tools for psycholinguistic analysis, but also potentially dangerous instruments when deployed for manipulation. A language model that has learned how certain personality types are persuaded could be used for highly personalized manipulation. The ability to imitate the language style of arbitrary persons opens new dimensions of identity deception. The future of computational psycholinguistics will likely be shaped by several trends. Multimodal models will integrate language with prosody, gesture, facial expressions, and physiological signals to create even more comprehensive psychological profiles. Real-time monitoring could enable continuous assessment of emotional and cognitive states. Personalized interventions could be automatically generated, based on individual language patterns. The boundary between human and machine psychological expertise will increasingly blur, with hybrid systems in which algorithms and human experts work symbiotically together. The central insight remains: language is never neutral. Every utterance is a psychological document, a snapshot of cognitive, emotional, and social processes. It reveals far more about us than we consciously intend to communicate.